Welcome to 60-Minute Seminars. I'm Sherry Wantuck, regroup coordinator at Summit Church, and with me is Lindsay Horvitage.
Hello.
We are going to be talking about what it is like to live in a global pandemic and all the things that go with that.
Yes.
So over the next 3 weeks, we hope to create an open dialogue about things that are not always talked about in the church. And we really just are glad that you guys have joined us for the first one this week. Tonight, we're addressing COVID, the trauma, the anxiety, all the feelings that go with that. Lindsay, can you tell us a little bit about why you chose this topic?
So I think if I remember correctly, when you first reached out, we had loosely titled it Life Post-COVID. And I remember kind of laughing to myself and thinking, funny. We won't be post by August.
Yes.
I don't think at that point we quite knew everything that would happen in 2020.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, this is something, obviously everything that has gone on this year has affected us all in different ways. And I can speak a little bit personally what it's looked like in our household, but then also what I've seen at work working with other people, because nobody's immune to it.
You're right, it affects all of us. So, want to let you guys know if we are live, so you can text your questions to the phone number on the screen, or you can text your questions directly into the comments that you see below, and we will be answering those live the last 15 minutes or so, that you can ask Lindsay anything that you want about this topic, and I think she's gonna have some great information for us. So once again, for those of you just joining us, I'm Sherry Wantuck, regroup coordinator at Summit Church, and this is licensed mental health counselor Lindsay Horvitage joining us. She's from Charis Counseling. And can you tell us a little bit about the population that you typically work with?
Sure. So, I've been in Orlando for 8 years. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, so if some of the accent slips in, that's where that's coming from. But after moving here, starting working in the field of mental health, and really have had a chance to work with a lot of diverse and different populations. I worked in jail for 3 years in the Orange County Jail.
Wow.
I've worked for several different private practices, and I've also done some work with a local organization that helps women recover and rehabilitate from human trafficking. So currently in private practice, my office is in the Dr. Phillips location, so Southwest Orlando. I did not know where Dr. Phillips was until we opened an office there. And I see a lot of different types of people, men, women, some older teenagers, families, and really with a focus on complex trauma. So complex trauma is when there's a lot of layers of trauma or there's been ongoing trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety issues, depression, sexual issues, gender issues, a lot of relationship type work as well.
Okay, great. So all over, kind of have it all in there.
Yes.
A lot of experience. It's great. Well, as a mental health therapist, how have you seen the pandemic affect your clients over the last few months? Has it changed?
Yeah.
What people are coming to talk to you about?
Yeah.
Are they coming for the same things? Are you seeing different people? How is that all working right now?
Yeah, so just for context, I primarily see people in an office setting, and then around mid-March, I think all of my colleagues and I at the same time decided to go 100% virtual.
Okay.
So we did not stop working, we just started seeing people online via telehealth.
Okay.
Which is a very different dynamic.
Yes.
I have a few people who have always done telehealth for various reasons. They don't drive, they need to stay at home for whatever reason, but most people had not done
That
therapy via video before.
Okay.
And so that was one huge transition, was helping people understand, this is still HIPAA compliant,
Right.
This is still confidential, it's still safe. It's just a very different dynamic when you're in your home, and I, at the time, was working from home. And so pretty quickly, there was the panic that we all sort of felt
Right.
At the beginning, not really knowing what's going on, and then seeing that in people. And then once that sort of rounded out over a few weeks, people were, losing their jobs, being furloughed, working from home. A lot of people who live alone, hadn't seen anybody in a while. I pretty quickly saw some changes as far as increased anxiety and depression symptoms, some relapse issues, increased behaviors that people probably would normally do, relationship issues, especially within marriages and within families, or for people who live alone, really struggling with isolation. And then honestly started seeing people struggle with self-harm and suicidality probably more than I'd ever seen in a short period of time.
And would those be with people that had struggled with suicidal ideations before, or that you would have had contracts with before, or was that
good question?
New people?
It was interesting. So people who had already been struggling, I think it definitely was amplified and has been amplified, especially in isolation and people being cut off from community. But even people who I might consider really high functioning, where now, I was asking them, have you showered in a few days?
Wow.
Have you eaten? Are you going outside for at least 10 minutes of air and sunshine? I mean, it really has impacted everybody across the board in ways I definitely could have not foreseen.
Yeah, it's something completely new
Yeah.
for all of us. One question I did have is, where is the line of talking to our friends in our community via Zooms and phone calls and text messages and all those things? When would you say an indicator would be that we need to seek professional help, or to talk to someone as yourself as a mental health counselor versus just talking to our friends
Sure.
about the stress that we're having or the anxiety of like being stuck at home and not wearing pants on Zoom calls and things like that?
Yes. I think that's tough, because one thing that a lot of people lost quickly, especially as we went into shelter in place and stay at home orders, was community, or at least that in-person interaction. And I think we can agree this is way different
Yes,
than
it is.
staring at a screen. So I would say if at any time you find yourself falling into patterns of behavior that are destructive, certainly. So substance abuse, behaviors that are harmful to yourself or somebody else, that's definitely time to reach out to a professional. But even if you're noticing that anxiety or depression is impairing your daily functioning, your ability to wake up, get out of bed, be able to show up for work. If a lot of people were struggling with insomnia, still are.
Yes.
I know that hit me really hard,
The
pretty
sleep
early
routine
on.
is difficult.
Anytime it's impairing with your daily functioning or your ability to connect with others, that may be a great time to go, okay, I could probably seek professional help now outside of my immediate community.
Okay, great, thank you. What impact are all the events that are happening right now? I know we have a lot going
Yes.
on in the world. What impact is that having on our bodies, on our brains, on our emotions?
D, all of the above. Yes, so like you've referenced a couple of times, yes, there's the pandemic, and that is affecting everybody across the world. And then in our country, we've also had a lot of racial injustice issues, a lot of social justice issues pop up. We've had protests, we've had riots, we've got a big election year coming up. So all of these things affect all of us. The details may look different, but we're all impacted.
Right.
And so those things in and of themselves, what I call sort of communal traumas or communal anxiety,
Okay.
create a layer. And I'm going to talk a lot about things in layers.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of layers, especially right now
It feels
in
like
life.
it. 2020 is.
Yeah, and when you add
lot.
multiple layers on something, it adds pressure. So there's the layer of things going on within our communities, within our country, within our local areas that can increase anxiety. But then we've also got stuff going on in our individual lives too.
Right.
And so the way I normally talk about anxiety when I'm talking with someone is we talk about real threat versus perceived threat.
Okay.
And anxiety can occur when the fear is very real, but the threat is not.
Okay.
What's tricky about everything this year is there is a real threat and there's a perceived threat. And so we're basically having to have two conversations at one time and tackle it in a very different way. So people have really gotten sick. People have really passed away. People have really lost their jobs. People have really been impacted. So there's dealing with that. And then there's also dealing with the fear of, could this happen to me or within my family as well?
So people that may sometimes think worst case scenario,
Right.
it actually could come
Exactly.
out to be the worst case scenario for them. And then you're still having to do this via screen
Right.
with counseling. Have you gotten new clients that you have not met in person and are just doing it?
Yes, so that's been an interesting dynamic as well, is meeting people on screen, building that trust, building that rapport, which you can still do. It's just, again, very different dynamic. and then going, okay, we're going to build this relationship and have these hard conversations. And we have not even sat in a room together yet.
Right.
So now I've been back in the office for a couple of weeks with anybody who's comfortable doing
Okay.
so. And I just wanted to mention that if you are seeking help during this time, every therapist I know in the city is providing the option of telehealth even if they are back in the office, because they want everybody to feel safe.
Yeah.
So getting to see people for the first time in person, I mean,
Right.
I may have talked to them for 6 weeks, but there are some people we're elated when we see each other because it's the first time we've been able to be in a room
Right.
together.
It does make it different.
Yes.
I mean, I started seeing a counselor and it's been all over Zoom. So it's
Wow.
very different with that, but it's still able to build that connection. It's been very helpful during this time, I will say. What role do you feel that shame plays in all of this? And I know we don't often talk about shame in a public forum, but
Sure.
everybody feels it at some point. So how is that affecting us during this time?
It plays a huge role. So shame is the sense that something that I am wrong or that I am bad. Guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is a sense of who I am or what I am is bad. So it's that little voice. I usually talk about the little voice that talks in our head
yeah.
that is
Don't
very
like that
attacking.
one.
No, I don't like it either. And it's always there. So that played a big role. Part of it is what I call the comparison game. Some of this we do naturally as humans. But with everything going on this year, this is how a little piece of fabric has somehow now become a religious statement and a political statement, and divisive even with families, because we're starting to compare and go, well, if I'm not doing that, or if he's not doing that, or she's not doing that. So it's hard not to compare our situations to others. I know personally in our home, it played a big role because I continued to work, but my husband actually was furloughed. And so this language of essential and what does essential employee mean became divisive, not so much between us, but all of a sudden one of us was considered essential
Right.
and one not, which is not true. And we were having conversations, okay, like, how are you doing? I'm working, you're not. Are you okay today? What do we need to do? Even just conversations like that got pretty intense pretty quickly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You bring up the dynamic of people in the same households
Yeah.
having different experiences. Do you have advice or suggestions for people that maybe have home situations where they're not on the same page, where one person is like, I'm wearing a mask, I'm wiping down my groceries, I am sheltering in place, and the other person is going out, doing the groceries, going to different places? That can create, I would assume, a lot of conflict for marriages, relationships, roommate situations. What do you suggest people do if they are in that place?
So I have seen that.
Okay.
Quite a bit of it actually, between spouses, especially people who have kids. What do we do about childcare? What do we do about school? That's a big one.
Oh yeah, that one.
One
been
spouse
rough.
is all about cleaning and wearing masks. The other is not. I want to go to the gym. Don't go to the gym. These are very real conversations a lot of us are having that we've probably never had before.
Yeah.
And so I would say the first thing is have the conversations. I think the worst thing we can do is to just hide stuff and push it down, because that builds resentment.
Right.
And I know the conversations can be hard, and I know sometimes, especially when you've already been locked in the house for a couple months.
You can't go anywhere.
Maybe you're working from home, maybe your kid's been climbing all over you, maybe even you've been home alone or you're toggling. I mean, I feel like when people sign a lease, nobody agrees to 24/7
No.
for 8 to 12 weeks. I don't think you even do that with marriage. And so really just saying, okay, what are the boundaries we need to have? I know at one point with my husband, Tim, and I both working at home, we had to sit down and go, okay, what do you need in your workspace? What do I need in mine? How do we create quiet? How do we create space? And we don't live in a huge place right now. So we physically had to create space where there was no space. And really just talk through our boundaries, talk through our needs, and then really be empathetic towards the other person. And so that's a starting point.
Okay.
If it gets past that and you need somebody to moderate or mediate, sometimes that can be helpful.
Okay.
But I have seen a lot of that, and it has caused some issues.
Yeah, being stuck in a house with somebody and not agreeing.
Yeah.
That you can't go anywhere. Can't.
Yeah, and we're not talking about,
Take a
just
breather.
do you want Chinese or Italian for dinner? I mean, we're talking about health and safety and well-being at this point. And so those are big conversations.
Great. Well, we've been talking about a lot of the difficult things that have been happening in
Yes.
the pandemic. So have there been good things that you have seen come out of the pandemic besides my love for the new Taylor Swift album?
Yes,
I'm
which
very
I've
happy about that coming out during the
Not
pandemic.
listened to yet. I apologize.
Yes, we will have a chat about that later. But what good things have you seen come out of this lately?
I've seen people be really creative,
Okay.
really innovative. I mean, back to talking about our brains and our bodies, we were not meant to be on Zoom for 8 hours a day. I had to reorganize my schedule really quickly a couple weeks in because I was physically and emotionally just drained way more than I am when I see people in person. And so I've seen people be really creative and really innovative, whether that's figuring out their workspace, whether that's figuring out how to take breaks, whether that's figuring out how to do, movie nights
Right.
online and connect with people that they can't see in person. One example that I've been pretty proud of and excited to tell, because I think it's a really great example. My brother, his name is Sam, he lives in Memphis, and he had sold a business back in the fall, and he was in between contracts when all this happened. And so he's kind of sitting there going, what do I do? And he went back and he looked at his passions. What am I good at? What am I passionate about? And he started a podcast, and it's been awesome. And that's not something I'm sure he ever would have done, had this not happened. Not that we want any of this to happen.
Right.
But whether it's starting something you've never tried before, I've seen people just reach out in relationships they never would have done before, reconnect with people they haven't had time to
Right.
talk to in forever.
I've seen a lot of bread making on social
A
media.
lot of bread making.
Yes.
Mine failed miserably. But I think, people painting and drawing and building things and gardening. I think people who've never kept a blade of grass alive ever. Now we're seeing these beautiful gardens, and I think it may have created some space for people who didn't have any margin in their lives.
Right.
Again, not that we ever want this to be the way it's done. I just think it's been really fascinating to see how innovative humans can be with what they're given.
Yeah, given some time to
Sure.
slow down and really see things around them.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what do we do with all of this? I feel like with the media and all of us going on the internet and social media and talking to people, there's a lot of information being given to us and a lot of information that you've given.
Sure.
What do we do? Like you said, we originally thought this talk was going to be post COVID, and we are still living through it. What can we do while we are living through it?
I think, just to touch on a lot of things you just mentioned, there's so much information, and not all of information is actually good.
Right.
We are actually way, way overstimulated, probably more than our brains were ever meant to be. So maybe even limiting that is a great place to start. I know there are a couple of weeks I've just put social media aside. If the news is really anxiety provoking or triggering for you, maybe don't watch the news. If you want to read the paper once a day, sometimes just putting some boundaries in place can be really, really helpful. Self-compassion in this is huge, and this is something I talk about a lot in therapy. A lot of us extend tons of compassion to other people, but we're not quick to give it to ourselves. So this is a much longer conversation, but there's been a lot of talk, specifically through the pandemic and everything we've been through all together, I gained the quarantine 15, I slipped up on this, or I did that. Nobody's nailing this. Nobody is crushing the situation this year. Maybe Leslie Jordan on Instagram, but that's it. And so having compassion and going, okay, I've never done this before. We've never done this before. So what do I need to take care of myself, to take care of the people around me, and how can I be as kind about it as possible?
Okay.
And then going for specific resources, if you do need to reach out to a counselor or therapist, that can be helpful. Regroup, obviously, is phenomenally helpful. And I love the way you guys have adjusted, even with, having to stay at home and changing things to being online.
Yep.
There are still tons and tons of resources available if you need to connect to others. And I think that is kind of the next step for all of us, even if we have to do it creatively. How do we either seek out or maintain connection in healthy ways, even while the world looks a little different?
Yes. You mentioned a little bit about self-care. I feel like that's a term that gets thrown around a lot of, yes, I'm doing a self-care Sunday, and it looks different for a lot of people. What would be the best outcome of self-care? Like, for some people I know, they're like, I want to read a book. I just need some quiet time. I want to take a bath. But like, what should they be getting from that self-care, even if it looks different for each person?
Self-care is tricky. I think it has taken on a meaning, going to get manis and pedis or massages, which those things are great, but that's more pampering. Self-care is actually attending to our own needs. So that may be sleep or rest. That may be moving our body and moving our muscles. That may be sitting down and making a new budget if your finances have changed due to job loss. Basically, it's sitting down and going, what do I need? Or if you're in a family setting, what do we need in order to be as healthy as possible right now? So sometimes it does look, like reading a book or Netflix and chill, but sometimes it looks really, really practical.
Okay.
Coming up with a routine, coming up with some structure to get through the day, especially if you're working from home and now, it's like, I don't know, I haven't changed out of pajamas in 5 days. What's the point?
Right.
It's really just about attending to needs and figuring out what that looks like.
Okay. Is there anything that you, like one piece of advice that you would want to give someone that comes to you during this time?
Just one?
2?
No, it's okay.
Maybe 2?
Oh, gosh, that's tough.
Did I stump you?
You don't have to get it right.
Okay.
Because there's nothing to get right. We don't have a lot of the answers.
Yeah.
And be kind to yourself and the people around you.
Awesome.
That's what I can come up with right now.
Okay. We can come back to that one.
Sure.
All right. So we have hit a time that we can go to some live questions.
Okay,
if
great.
You're okay with that?
Sure.
So just as a reminder, you guys can go and text questions to the number that's on the screen or put them right in the comments. So
Make them good.
Make them good. Let's challenge Lindsay. Let's do this, everybody. Come on.
We're not going to go that far.
All right. So one question that came in that I think this is great because it will work for anytime, actually. It's directed to you. What questions do you recommend asking a counselor when trying to start therapy to make sure it's a good fit? And what therapeutic models work best? Because I know some people do story therapy, some people do trauma therapy, some people do empty chair, CBT, all those different things. What should we ask when we're maybe calling or having that first session with the counselor?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I think a question people don't ask enough. I tell people to shop around. I do, at Caris, we offer free 15-minute phone consultations with a therapist.
Wow.
A lot of people will actually do that. And shop around. Like, the goal is for you to find somebody you're comfortable with that you feel like you can trust. So just like going to the doctor, if you don't feel like you can trust them and you don't feel comfortable sitting in a room with them, you're probably not going to have a good experience. So I tell people to call around.
Okay.
And I think the best question I get is, why did you become a therapist?
Oh, that's a good
For
one.
several reasons. One, because you automatically get a sense of why this person is doing what they're doing and if they're authentic and genuine or not. And it sort of opens the door to start to get to know each other a little bit better. So other than the normal questions, how much do you charge? Where's your office located?
Right.
Do you have availability? Why did you become a therapist? And what are we going to do here? What is this going to look like? You
What is
mentioned
the goal?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I do is I tell people I'm trained in a lot of different things, but there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
So I'm going to get to know you. We're going to figure out what that looks like together, and then
Okay.
build it along the way.
Okay, great. So definitely a good counselor would not be pressuring you to stay
Yeah.
with them or anything like that. They would encourage you to find the right fit
Yeah,
for
because
them.
it's not. I mean, me as the therapist, it is not about me, and it should never be about me.
Okay.
It's their time and their process, and how I can be most helpful.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we do have a question here that unfortunately you can't answer.
Oh, okay.
So I will just quickly answer it. Someone has asked, what is your favorite song on the Taylor Swift Folklore
I can't answer
album?
that one.
And my real answer is Exile, because Zach Van Dyke told me that was the best song and I can't stop listening to it. But if I wanted to be really cool, I would say it's Betty, but really it's Exile. So we'll move on because, as I said,
I'll just have to listen.
You'll have to listen to it next time. So how do we actually move out of feeling so lonely in isolation, especially when you're a single person living alone, or being able to deal with it well in this extended pandemic without a projected end date? So like, I know when I work with children in therapy, we set a timer a lot of times to be like, it's going to be over in 30 seconds, and here we are. And
we don't have that at all with a lot of things right now. Pretty much everything going on in the world right now, we don't have that. And so that piece is difficult just to embrace that. And so it's about looking at, okay, what do I have influence over right now? So if you are a single person living alone, obviously this has probably been pretty isolating. So I would say reach out for connection in any way you can. And again, there's been some really creative ways of doing that. But even more than that, I would say be willing to say, have somebody you can talk to and say, hey, I feel lonely. Right. I mean, I've received text messages from friends and emails and WhatsApp chats, hey, I'm really struggling. And I think that's the most powerful thing, is being able to tell somebody I'm struggling and then let somebody connect with you in that way.
It's hard to ask for help.
It really is.
Yeah, so to do that initial reach out is really important.
If you want to induce depression in a human person who's never struggled with it, you will remove all forms of healthy physical touch, isolate them to be completely alone, and remove their ability to make daily choices.
So everything
so
that's happening.
That's pretty much what's happened for a lot of people the past several months.
Okay. Let's see. For those that are working from home for the foreseeable future, do you have any advice for them?
I think so, and I'm totally going to credit my husband with this one, because he has been working from home and he's doing a great job. He hates it just because he misses his coworkers and he misses having a separate space, and he doesn't know when he'll be back in the office. So that is, I think, the biggest thing we've had to face together, and what I'm telling other people: make space however you can make space, and then put some structure around that. So normally, like, what works really well for me is going to the office. Work is over here, home is over here. I can keep them separate. A lot of people can't do that right now.
Right.
So if that's carving out space in a separate room, if that's going for a walk at the end of the day, any way you can create some margin and boundaries around work life versus home life, I would say do that.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of people that are living alone in very small spaces.
And I've seen, again, people be super creative.
Right.
Whether it's buying a really gorgeous chair that they sit in to kind of mark out and make the space
That's
a little
how I started.
different.
I started a special chair that I would Zoom and work in, and then I would.
And then you get out of your special chair, and that's your work chair. If you put a curtain up, I know for a lot of people, I was telling them, just because you're working at home, wake up every day and at least change outfits.
Right.
Even if you just change your shirt and fix your hair. I know it's going to look different for guys and girls, but have some marked start to the day and to the end of the day, just to retain that sense of separation, because when that line gets blurred, it just adds more fatigue, and we've got enough fatigue.
Yeah, we're all a bit tired from all of this. I have one on here. What questions are good to be asking teenagers during the pandemic to make sure they are managing the disappointment and stress and anxiety well? Like, a lot of our teenagers are missing graduations and proms and all those really important and fun milestones that are part of growing up. And then we have children that are moving from elementary to middle school, and which middle school years, but
it's hard enough as it is.
Yes, but to do it online. Or some of their friends are online, some of them are in person. Like, what questions can parents be asking them?
Yeah, that is really, really important. I think what I've seen be most powerful, either with teenagers I work with or families I've talked to, is number one, just opening the lines of communication. Whether that's a weekly check-in, kind of, I call it the state of the family address, where everybody kind of gets to say, here's how I'm really doing. People who've kept the lines of communication open, I've seen that be really effective, because you're right, a lot of older teenagers, high schoolers, are missing out on things they've been looking forward to their whole lives. One thing I've really been able to do with teenagers is just give them a place to be angry. if they need to yell, if they need to hit a pillow, if they need to just express in some way, this isn't fair, and you're right, it's not fair, and I don't have an answer for it, but we can be angry.
Okay.
Just giving them freedom to express what's going on with them in a safe environment, and ask them, okay, what do you need? What would be most helpful? Because sometimes kids can answer that pretty well.
Okay, so not to push the positive vibe, but try to spin it all the time.
Right.
Like let them feel
They
the
know
emotion.
everything's not okay.
Okay.
They probably know more than we do because I don't use half of the social media things
Right, there's
that
a
are
lot
out
of
there. So I'm that person who is now at the point where if I'm talking to a teenager afterwards, I have to Google what certain words mean because I don't know some
same.
of what they've said. And so they definitely know. Kids are not resilient, they are sponges. So even with little kids, you may not be able to say, here's what a global pandemic is,
Right.
but you can explain things are going on and let's talk about it and let's have those open lines of communication.
Okay, great. For those of you that just may have joined us, just a reminder, we are doing our 60-minute seminars, and this is week 1, talking about living through a global pandemic. I'm Sherry Wantek, regroup coordinator here, and we have licensed mental health counselor Lindsay Horvitage answering questions live. So in the description, you can text your questions in or write your questions into the comments, and we're going to just continue going on.
Great.
If you're good?
I'm good. We're
Okay,
good.
we're going to keep going then. Let's see. How do you encourage someone that needs to talk to a therapist or professional, but they are fighting that option?
I hear this question a lot. Before I answer, the disclaimer is you can't make anybody do anything. And I know that's really hard, especially when it's somebody you love and that you care about.
Right.
So we can't control or change somebody else's feelings, emotions, or behaviors. I would say be a good listener.
Okay.
I would say, even if you want to say, when and if you're ready, I have some resources. But mostly be a good listener and let them know that they're not alone and be ready if they do come around the corner and say, okay, I think I'm ready to get some help.
Okay, so definitely not pressing,
Yeah,
forcing.
it doesn't work.
That's not going to work.
It doesn't work. Removing shame and being a good listener, I think, are the best things
Okay.
we can do in that situation.
It's hard.
It's super
That's a hard one because
especially when you care about the person, you love them, and you see it. But people don't respond well to that.
yeah, I can get that. So, okay, let's see. Here's a good one. How do I deal with feeling guilty about not having as much of an impact as maybe some others, but still miserable and wanting my pre-COVID life back? So I know some
Yeah.
people, like you said, lost their jobs, are in very difficult home situations, while other people, their jobs have thrived during this. And they're doing well. However, they still are stuck with a lot of the restrictions that are happening
Sure.
and not be able to go anywhere. But how do you deal with that?
Sure, even I would say people looking for new work, wanting to make a transition, people who generally volunteer but are not able to go out and do things. There's nothing wrong with wanting the life, whatever the life looked like we had before. I think we can all attest that we want at least pieces of that back, maybe if not all of it.
Are we going to get all of it?
I can't answer that question. And I'm not going to pretend to answer that question. My guess is no, but I think that's always true regardless of the situation, because we never really know what's coming down the pipeline. Sorry,
Right.
that was way too philosophical. I don't think there's anything wrong, and guilt, again, is that sense of if you've done something wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
There's some people who would love it if we never went back to the way things
Right.
were. And so I think
I'm good without the hugging.
yeah, I know.
I mean,
know.
I'm
You've
thrilled.
made that incredibly clear
I'm
in our
just making
budding
sure
friendship.
that- just in case you guys don't remember. you know.
But yeah, I don't think there's anything to feel guilty about. And a lot of people's impact has been affected, whether it's you're not able to go to work or you're not in a profession that the phones are blowing up right now.
Right.
That doesn't mean you have less purpose or less impact. It may look a little different right now. And again, that's maybe where some of this creativity and ingenuity can come in and going, okay, if I have time on my hands, what does it look like? At the same time, this isn't about filling every hour and being as busy as possible.
Okay.
That's where we came from.
Right.
And so being okay with where you are. Maybe impact at this point looks like self-care. Maybe impact looks like Skyping grandma because nobody can visit the assisted living home.
Right.
There's so many ways to do things differently right now. And I know it's not ideal, but it doesn't have to be bad.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that there are different locations for therapy, like
Yes.
Karis that offers their 15-minute free session just to get to know you. I didn't even know that existed, which is awesome. What can people do that can't afford therapy? I know that I've talked to therapists that have sliding scales. Are there scholarships or other things that are available for people that obviously money can be a big issue right now?
And therapy, I mean, first of all, therapy is expensive, period. Global pandemic or not. And there's reasons for that. And if you have questions about that, you're welcome to ask me. But it is expensive, but especially right now, people who were strapped before probably were more strapped now, and maybe people who never were before are now. So you mentioned sliding scale. A lot of therapists offer sliding scale, and always, always, always ask. What sliding scale means is basically a therapist will look at what you can afford, and as best as they are able to cover their own bills, meet you where you are with that. So it's a reduced fee. Okay. Some practices have an application for that you fill out, some don't, but always ask if there's a sliding scale, especially if that practice doesn't take insurance. A lot of private practices in Orlando don't take insurance. Again, there's very specific reasons for that. I'm happy to share it another time or via email. But that adds an obstacle for a lot of people. So ask about sliding scale or reduced fee. There are a couple of places in town that have scholarship funds that have reduced fee counseling. And if they can email you and connect back to me, I'm happy to provide those resources because that's crucial. I know personally I have been in a place before where therapy saved my life, and the only reason I could go is because the therapist was incredibly generous with reducing the fee. And so that's something I've been passionate about. I don't ever want money to get in the way of somebody getting help.
Right.
And there's a lot of people in the city who feel the same way.
Okay, that's great to know. Because it can be daunting to realize you're going to have to put out a lot of money.
Yes.
But it's very needed for this time for everyone.
You shouldn't have to choose between groceries and therapy. I just don't want that to be a choice anybody has to make.
Okay, great. All right, so we have some single folks asking some questions.
Yeah.
And how are they supposed to deal with singleness during this and meeting others for dating during this? Like, how do you date in a quarantine?
This is actually a conversation I have had a lot, both with friends and at work. Dating, first of all, is hard enough as it is. I think we can just agree on that.
It's interesting.
And then you add in this element, of everything that's happened this year. I know a lot of people who have continued doing the apps and the online dating, but then maybe you can't go meet in person. So I've seen people do this different ways. Maybe they meet on FaceTime or Zoom. Some people are meeting in parks if they, have gotten to the point where they really want to meet and they've been chatting on one of the apps. They've gone and sat across a picnic table at a park or done something outside. I think dating is hard enough as it is.
Right.
And so again, I hate to keep using the word creativity, but it takes some creativity. Everything takes some creativity this year. Right. And for anybody who's who lives at home by themselves, or even with roommates, but it's not a partner spouse situation, really paying attention to the loneliness factor. And if you are feeling that, if you are experiencing that, if you're feeling disconnected from your community, let somebody know, because you do not have to do this by yourself. I know none of these answers are an ideal situation, but you don't have to do it by yourself.
Okay. So definitely finding your tribe of people, your community that you can just say, it's hard right now, I'm having a bad day.
Right. And whether that's friends you've had, I know one thing Summit has done is launch small groups, connect groups online. That's brilliant.
Right.
And maybe even some people who wouldn't have gone in person anyway and are now going, hey, I could try this.
Right. I know a lot of connect groups, like for parents, they can put their kids to bed and then jump online, which never would have happened in person.
No, so that may even be, something new moving forward in general, but making sure you don't do it by yourself.
Okay, so I have a really tough one for you. Apparently, we
nervous.
shouldn't have thrown out the challenge question.
Yeah.
Well, it's one that's been posed to me just recently, so I feel
Okay.
like it's almost like a passing of a torch to ask you. Would you rather have an enormous puppy or a tiny rhino?
I should have known this was coming. Can I not have both?
You cannot. No, you have to make a choice.
I have to make a choice. I feel like the answer has to be tiny rhino.
And I'm going to take it a step further. Why?
Well, number one, I'm not sure they exist. But number two, anything miniature, tiny things. I love tiny things. So like those videos where they have little tiny pots and little tiny kitchens, and they make little tiny meals. That's totally fascinating to me. So a tiny little rhino. I'm constantly telling my husband, like, I want a manatee. I want a baby cow.
I want a manatee.
And so if there were a tiny version, that would be ideal.
Okay. I like how you went with that. That was your thought process of choice. I also picked tiny rhino when I was asked this question, but I was thinking about, I have a dog, and I was thinking about having to clean up after the dog.
You were far more practical.
So I was like, giant puppy,
Sure.
giant other things would happen.
I
So-
already have a pretty big dog,
Oh,
and I love her a lot, so we got that covered.
Okay, good. Let's see. How can mental stress cross over to physical symptoms, and how can we do our best to mitigate the effects?
So I think that is something that a lot of us forget, and I even forget this sometimes, and I do this professionally. Our brains and our bodies are connected. And mental stress, I won't go into a complete neuroscience lesson here, but I'll give you a little bitty one.
Okay.
The way our brains process fear, threat, and danger directly affects our physical health. So our brain's primary function is survival. It doesn't care what you wanted to do that day. If the brain perceives any sort of threat or danger, it's going to click into survival mode. And what survival mode looks like in the body is producing stress hormones, sometimes raising the heart rate, sometimes shutting down other parts of functioning. And so there's a direct correlation between mental stress and physical health. Now that looks different for everybody. It can be GI, stomach issues. It could be immune disorders, immune conditions. It could be migraines. It could be nausea. It could be physical pain elsewhere. So being aware of the stress you're carrying and then paying attention to what that looks like in your body is really, really important.
Okay, good. Yes, I'm one of those people that when
Yes.
there's stuff going on emotionally, it shows up physically.
And
a
your
lot,
body,
so-
we can only outsmart our bodies for so long.
Okay.
It's
with this
kind of like,
extended-
I don't know if any of you have ever done this. I'm basically admitting I've done this, but tried to see how long you can drive your car with the gas light on.
Oh,
It's
yes,
going to shut down.
I
I
do
can
that
tell
all the
you.
time.
It might be at the corner of Dean and University. It's going to shut down. And our bodies are the exact same way. They're going to let us know when they've had enough. And we can only trick it for so long. So trying not to get to that point is ideal. But if you do get to that point, learning what your body needs and how to tend to it is really, really important.
Okay. We have another counselor pointed question. So how can we incorporate our faith when we work with a counselor?
That is a good question. Again, I get that a lot because the practice I work with is known as a Christian or faith-based practice. Individually, I would say most of the people I work with would not identify as Christian. They're coming from either a different faith background.
The clients and
yes,
patients
the
that you work
client's
with?
faith
Okay.
background, atheism, agnostic, skeptic. So a lot of times people will just ask me, and it kind of depends on if they're familiar with the practice, they kind of know, and they'll say, hey, what role does this play? They'll just ask me point blank. Some people have come through Google search or something, and they just sort of launch right in. But I've had people say, hey, my faith is a really important part of my story in my life. I want that to be a part of this conversation. Are you comfortable with that? Some people come in and say, I read online you're a Christian. I don't want that to be a part of my therapeutic process. Can we leave that out? So I would say just be honest and be upfront, and hopefully the therapist will tell you, yes, I can do that, or no, I can't.
Okay.
Because primarily you're there for your mental health and your emotional health, and then whatever is important to you should be a part of the process.
Okay.
And so being able to have that conversation, don't be afraid to ask them, what does this look like for you?
Okay, great. Let's see. All right. with this being a global issue, how can we help positively impact our immediate community? So what are some things that you would suggest for stressed out parents? Because I know a lot of people have parents that might be at that cusp of the age where
Sure.
they are in the risk zone and we can't visit them or go see them. Like what can we do for them?
Yeah, and that even looks different ways. I have a couple friends who've had pandemic babies.
Oh,
So
yes.
their birthing process did not look anything like they had planned, and they couldn't have traditional baby showers, or we couldn't do traditional meal trains. And so asking, that family, what do you need, and how can we provide that? If you're a part of a community or of a group of people, checking in and saying, okay, what are everybody's needs? And then how can we rally together? I think even just starting in your own neighborhood next door is a great place to start, whether that's asking people. I know a big thing, especially at the beginning, was, hey, we got into Costco, who needs toilet paper?
Oh my gosh, the toilet paper, I completely had
Yeah.
blocked that out of my memory.
We're not going back to that. But even just checking in with the people in your circle, what do you need and how can I do that? It may not look the same way that it's always looked, but that doesn't mean we can't help each other. And so there's different ways to meet needs. I mean, sure, you can give financially, but not everybody's even in a place to do that.
Right.
So maybe it's having Uber Eats delivered to somebody.
Right.
Maybe it's saying, hey, if you want to meet me in this park, I can watch your kids while you
that's
take
a
some
great
time
one.
off, because that way you're outside and you still have space.
Right.
Yeah, we
So
can
some
still
different
do
acts
it. It
of
just
service.
looks different.
Okay.
But honestly, just asking. I mean, there are people I've just said, hey, what do you need?
Right.
Or people have asked me that. I've had a lot of good friends go, what do you need right now?
Yeah. Toilet paper.
Right. We're
mean-
good on that front now.
Okay.
But I
Clorox
do know
wipes?
people who were like, hey, I've got 5 kids and we don't have hand sanitizer and I can't find any. And people, loaded up their doorstep. My grandmother at the beginning needed some things and her neighbor just showed up with stuff on the door.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there's different ways to go about it.
Okay.
Kind of that time, talent, resources thing.
Right.
It doesn't always have to be money, or it doesn't always have to cost money, but we can still help each other.
Yeah. Just be cool. Online, different things like that. Any thoughts on helping kids who hate distance learning because they can't see their friends in real life, or just in general, the lack of social interaction that's affecting them in these really important years?
Yeah.
Like what can parents or, friends, aunts, uncles do during this time for them?
Yeah, and I don't even know, I may go ahead and say I don't know if I have the answer to that, as much as I've sat with a lot of people asking the same questions.
Right.
Specifically teenagers who just are over the whole thing. They hated online school back in the spring, and they're hating it now. And so again, trying to come up with, okay, what does it look like to have everybody maybe meet out on the street and drive by and say hello to each other? I know a lot of people who've done that with their younger kids.
Right.
Again, it's hard to explain to a little kid, this is what a pandemic is, and here's why you're wearing a mask. And so, okay, let's get in the car and we're gonna go drive by your friends' houses and wave. But even for teenagers, I've heard some of them be really creative with that too, because good grief, they crave that social. This is when you're building relationships and
friendships.
learning how to make social interactions. And as much as I probably wouldn't go back to high school
Oh, yeah.
if you paid me, at the time, if you had cut me off from all of my friends, that there would have been some serious problems.
Right.
And so finding ways for them to connect as best as you possibly can, even if, there's an outdoor gathering place where everybody can stay apart. I have one friend, a mutual friend of ours, whose neighbor is a DJ, and she pulled all of her equipment out on the street, and they had a dance party, 6 feet apart, and people brought their kids out. Yeah, just connect as much as you can.
Okay. So just different ways
And
to connect.
I think patience is a big piece of this too. The parents need patience, the kids need patience. Patience is probably already short and running thin.
Right.
And knowing that, nobody's doing this perfectly. There's no such thing.
So there's a question specific about masks
Okay.
in here. How can parents work with their young kids about wearing a mask, especially when they go back to school? This person is asking for their really awesome nephew.
Okay.
And I might be able to jump in on this one a little bit
I
for
might
you.
need some help too from a kid perspective. So my mom has been a teacher for 40 years now, and I know they're wrestling with this at her school a lot, and my other friends who are teachers. I'm definitely going to ask for your help. I mean, I think encouraging, don't do as I say, not as I do. Like, if you're asking them to wear a mask, you need to wear your mask too.
That is a big one.
I know the way the conversation's been framed, I've heard some parents do this really well. This is actually to help keep our friends safe. We're keeping our friends healthy. That's what this is for. I know it's not very comfortable.
Right.
As soon as we get in the car or get home, we can take it off. But I'd love to hear what you have to say too.
Yes. So I also am a certified behavior analyst, so do behavioral work, and we shape the behavior up. So working on it at home before you actually have to go out anywhere, setting that timer again, and doing like really short spurts of maybe 5 minutes of the mask on, and then you can take it off, and then increasing the time as you go. Because
I have to do that as an adult.
Right. Like going out right now and going to the grocery store and then running errands and wearing that mask for long periods of time.
Yeah.
It starts to wear on you, and that's where I really feel for our like first responders and things like that, and nurses that are wearing that for 12-hour shifts and things.
And maybe find a way to make it fun. I mean, you had an incredible mask on earlier.
Yes, I was wearing my Golden Girls mask.
Yes. I've seen really fun ones, so maybe let them pick out, do they want a Marvel character? Do they want a Disney character? Do they have a favorite so-and-so?
Oh, that's a fun one.
Just making it fun.
Right.
I know putting a piece of cloth on your face is not fun, but if there's any way to make it fun, do that.
Yeah, like the John Parker mask that Kaylee got was very creative and
kind of terrifying. Yes.
Slightly terrifying. Yeah. But it's okay. You got to have fun with it. So we've got about 5 more minutes to answer questions. With COVID being such a decisive topic, how can we maintain relationships with loved ones who disagree with when COVID impacts everything?
Yes. And I think this is true not just for COVID, pretty much for everything going on right now. And I've experienced a lot of this too. Even with an extended family, and it's tough. Yeah. I know that's not really an answer, and I will elaborate, but I just want to acknowledge it's really hard. And I have seen relationships get cut off this year simply because of that. Right. And it's sad, and I really think there's something to grieve there. I would say have conversations as best as you can. Hopefully, I think ideally we'd be able to get to a place where you could say, can we agree to disagree? But if you're in our home, or if you're around us, this is what we'd ask that you agree to. But again, things have become very, very divisive, and sometimes we do have to make tough calls. Like maybe there's a family birthday party, but they are not wearing masks, and that doesn't feel safe for you. At the end of the day, you got to protect, what feels safe for you and for your family. And my hope is that there can be relational healing and mending as things go along. But I mostly just want to acknowledge that, I've experienced that already too, and it's really, really hard. And I don't know if I even have a really solid answer yet, other than to be as kind as possible in the process, have as empathetic of conversations as you can, and then hopefully work towards repair at some point if everybody's open to it.
Okay. I think we have time for one more.
Sure.
This is coming from a guy that is just living a codependent nightmare right now.
Oh no.
So what are some specific methods we can use to reduce general anxiety when we're living with so many unknowns and there does not seem to be a right answer to questions we are faced with?
That is a great question, and a really practical one. What I call grounding exercises, I didn't come up with that. A lot of people call grounding exercises. So that may be deep breathing. That may be some guided imagery or some meditation or some mindfulness. That may look like some sort of yoga practice, really anything that connects you to your body and then reminds you where you are, and physically ground yourself, remind you where you are. That's a great place to start. And if you need help with that, there's a ton of apps. There's a lot of free resources online. But again, reaching out to a therapist or somebody who's trained in that could be really helpful. When you can't change your circumstances, it becomes, how do I care for myself with what I have, and at least look at, okay, what's my perspective of this right now? And so there are ways you can do that. It kind of goes back to the self-care thing. You know, does that look like a bedtime routine? Does that look like talking to a doctor about medication? Does that look like switching up your daily schedule? There's some really practical behavioral things we can do to reduce anxiety, even when there's anxiety swimming all around us.
Right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That was a lot of great information and
Good.
answering all those questions for us. If you did not get a question answered or you wanted to get in contact with Lindsay, you can email regroup@summitconnect.org and we will get you connected. Or you can keep adding your questions to the comments and someone from our team will get them forwarded and answered, and we will get information to you. We don't want to leave you hanging with that. And make sure you join us next week.
Yes.
Same time, same place, 7:30. We will be YouTube Live again. And next week we'll be joined by our friends, Teaching Minister Kaylee Newkirk and Summit Partner Sam Arocho. And they're going to be talking about adult friendships. So that it's titled Friends with Baggage, and what we bring to our adult friendships, especially during this time as well.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us.
Yes.
We really appreciate it and hope we'll see you next week.
Have a good night.